Hello and welcome. This is Matthias 76. Together, we are decoding the deception, and we are here tonight looking at a concept, a statement, something unique in the Word of God that is familiar to us all, but I think there are things for us to learn, things that as we go a little bit deeper, there is a profound message that is taught to us by this one phrase. We've got the thumbnail here on the screen now, Immanuel. Immanuel. And going into what this means and taking a deep look at it, I think there's a lot for us to gain from this. So the term Immanuel, and you'll see it with an E, you'll see it with an I. Here's the thing. It doesn't matter. I'll say that again. It doesn't matter. When you take a word from Hebrew and you transliterate it, meaning you just take the sounds and represent it in Greek, and then you take it and transliterate it into English, you've got a couple hops there, and whether it's an I or an E simply doesn't matter. We don't want to be hung up on that. But this phrase, it's something that was stated to King Ahaz in Isaiah 7:14. That's where we're going to begin this evening. We're not going to go into what was going on with Ahaz, the military and political intrigue that was at play. Ahaz was not a good guy, and he wasn't a faithful king. But God makes this statement through Isaiah to Ahaz, and it's about the Messiah. So we can separate it out entirely from the context in which it was found. What we are told here is exceedingly important. Therefore, he told Ahaz to ask for a sign. Ahaz said, "No, I'm not going to ask for a sign." Like he was too pious for that, which was just a load of nonsense. Therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Immanuel. And it was a virgin. It is virgin. Otherwise, what's impressive? What's behold about that? It's virgin. But Immanuel. And this is quoted as fulfilled in the Gospel of Matthew in his account of the birth of Jesus. And there we're told this, behold, and this is the angel Gabriel speaking to Joseph, the espoused husband, betrothed husband of Mary. Behold, the virgin shall be with child and bear a son, and they shall call his name Immanuel, which is translated God with us. So the angel is quoting Isaiah 7:14, and it's thrown in here, which is translated God with us. Now, it's interesting, this statement. I like to translate it a little bit differently because it makes us think God with us. I think it more effective because, make no mistake about it, this title, it's a made up word. You take three words and put them together, and it's a name. You pull it apart, and this is what it says: the with us God. He's the with us God. Words made up. There are a couple places in the Bible, many places that I can think of, where words are manufactured, created to convey an important meaning, and this is one of them. He is the with us God. Now, we need to kind of clear our memory banks of what we think of with God with us, and it's on Christmas cards and all that. And I'm not saying any of that is wrong. It's not. But we need to go grab a mindset and fill our memory banks with it. Your mindset about God is vastly different than the mindset of people in approximately 700 BC, which is the time of Isaiah. It's entirely different. It's entirely different what they thought about God and gods. And yes, there are gods. There are other divine entities. They are created. They are lesser than the God, God Most High. What they thought of how those deities, those spiritual entities interacted with them, whether it was Baal, Ashtoreth, Molech, pick your Ra, pick your deity. What they thought about those deities, what those deities thought of them was something that is so foreign to us, different altogether. Even what they thought about their relationship with Yahweh, the one true God, the God of gods, the Lord of lords, the King of kings, God Most High, and his interaction with them. And that's what we're going to be focusing on today. So the with us God, what's the big deal? What's the big deal that he is the with us God? When they heard this, they at the very least said, what? A with us God? Or you can say it the other way. And that's the reason they translate it the way they do, God with us, because in English it flows better. Other languages aren't so focused on word order, but God with us, what is that about? What in the world can this be talking about? And where we need to go, and this will be familiar to some of you, this thinking of where do the gods live? Where are they? Where do you find them? And they were real entities. Idols weren't just about nothing. They weren't. They were used in the worship of these other entities. Okay? Not going to do the whole Deuteronomy 32 worldview. I still owe you a video on that, but go look up Michael Heiser YouTube. Michael Heiser, Deuteronomy 32 worldview. He'll explain it better than I ever could, but I do need to put some stuff out there on it. Where do gods live? Where do the gods live? Well, hint, it ain't with us. They're not living with us. They're not hanging out with us. Where do gods live? Well, gods live on mountains and in gardens. And the Garden of Eden was on a mountain. You say, what? The Garden of Eden was on a mountain? If it wasn't on a mountain, then how did 4 rivers flow out of it? Rivers flow down. The Garden of Eden was on a mountain. Baal lived on a mountain. All gods in the ancient world lived up high. That's why a ziggurat, Tower of Babel, was a simulated, man-made mountain. They were remote. It's remote. People didn't used to climb mountains for fun. They had better sense than that, and they didn't have the time to waste climbing mountains and creating gear to do that. Mountains were remote, and gardens are lush, and there's food, and there's water in a dry, arid world. And what do you have in the Middle East? You have a dry, arid world. Even the places that they call a land flowing with milk and honey, we look at it and think, wow, that's pretty dry and arid. They had different standards than we do. But that was all the good stuff. They kept the good stuff for themselves, and it was remote. It was removed. It was inaccessible to man. Why? Why did they want it to be inaccessible, remote, and removed from man? Well, I'll tell you why. People are dirty, sticky, smelly, and annoying. And when you read the literature, the text, the holy text, the things written about the different gods, that's exactly the way the gods thought about people. And these weren't just stories that were made up. These deities, gods, lowercase g, were not good guys. They were fallen ones. They had been put in charge of the nations, and they went rogue. They liked the worship. They liked the adoration. They liked the praise. They liked the power. Does this sound like your friend who got promoted at work? They liked it, and they wanted more, and they didn't want to share it with anyone else. If you think about that, there's not a lot different than the way they operated than the way the Pharisees and the Sadducees operated. They had the power. They were going to keep it. They weren't going to give it away. Same kind of thinking. The corruption that power brings about. They didn't want. But these deities wanted the power. They wanted the adulation. They wanted the praise. They didn't want to really be with people. People are sticky, messy, and annoying. They looked at us, and what I think of, and I just thought of this now, thinking about us being dirty, sticky, smelly, and annoying. My high school football locker room, which was also our wrestling locker room. You want to go a place that stinks? Go in a boys' high school locker room. Ours weren't even air conditioned. They reek. That's you don't want to go in there unless you have to. And when you're a young guy and an athlete, girls in locker rooms tend not to smell as bad. I don't think. Never been in one, but walking by the door, they don't smell the same. If you don't have to go in there, you don't. That's kind of the thinking here. And it wasn't this separation, them being separated from the subjects, from the humans, wasn't the same as the separation that existed with God. These deities weren't concerned about sacred space and holiness and otherness, these terms that really you have to have your mind around if you're going to understand this thing. The tabernacle. Now, God traveled with the children of Israel throughout the wilderness. He dwelt in the tabernacle. He came down to the tent of meeting, but there were these degrees of separation. Only a priest could go into the holy place in here twice a day, and only the high priest could go into the Holy of Holies, where the footstool of God was, the throne of God there above the cherubim on the ark, once a year. God was with us. He was there, but he was apart. He was other. He was holy and distinct and different. But that kind of separation, and we could talk about this going through the book of Leviticus and looking at what all that stuff meant in the Torah in general at length, but just the concept. God had to be separated from us because of our sin. His presence would have destroyed us. But that's not why these other gods didn't want to be with their subjects and their people. They thought they were foul and nasty, and they didn't want to be around them. So now, back to our text, therefore, Yahweh himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name the With Us God. With Us God. Now, we're not going to go into this at great length, but it is important to touch on this part about the virgin. And I'm not going to defend the text and different things that you'll hear, that the word here isn't the word for virgin in the Old Testament. For the most part, that's a bunch of hooey. There were two words. They were used interchangeably, but that this is a virgin is made absolutely clear by the fact that, whoa, it's a sign. It's something special. Behold, wow, a virgin will conceive. That's a wow thing. And the New Testament translates it with the Greek word, as does the Septuagint, for virgin. But it was important that she was a virgin. The virginity of Mary is very important because Jesus, the Savior, the Messiah, was going to be true God and true man. We could talk about the importance of the two natures in Christ at length, but for our purposes here today, it's important because he was going to be with us. With us. Think of the line, and I'm trying to think which Christmas hymn it is. Veiled in flesh, the Godhead see. Hail the incarnate deity. Christ came in flesh. He was fully God. He was fully man. Part of why that was so that he could be with us. Now, this thing about Immanuel, we've touched on it already, but it's just radical. This is completely different thinking from what anybody ever thought was going to go on. And I should have made myself disappear for this here. That way I'm not in the middle of that screen. That'll make it better. Keep me out of the pictures. This is a radical thing. It's completely different than everything they knew about gods and their interaction with people. So here's our text, the virgin part. The virgin part. In Revelation 12, were given astronomical signs, astrological signs, if you want to say. What is described are very specific constellations in very specific positions and in relation to each other. That's Revelation 12. You can go watch my stuff on that on the channel. But part of it is that Virgo, the Virgin, was clothed with the sun. Where Virgo appeared in the sky, she was clothed with the sun, and the dragon was there. In the way they describe different constellations back in this day, one of the constellations was Draco, the dragon. And it, in relation with Jupiter and where the moon was, all these other things, is quite fascinating. But there is one time when the constellations being aligned the way they are in Revelation 12, 1-9, there is one time in history for a 3-hour period of time when that took place that way. And it was 3 BC, and the date for us, September 11th. September 11th, 3 BC. And I think that a very strong, and I just made it very briefly, strong argument can be made for that being the birth of Christ. It was also the first day of their new year, Tishri, and that had to do, it was when they believed that Moses was born. It's when the Messiah would be born. Enough of that. Let's move on. As I said before, this passage is quoted in Matthew 1:23 by Gabriel. So all this was done that might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the Lord through the prophet, saying, Behold, the virgin shall be with child and bear a son, and they shall call his name Immanuel, which is translated God with us. The virgin being with child, the angel comes and tells Joseph, don't be afraid to take her as your wife. And this is one of the many instances in Matthew, I think there are 10, where this very wording is used that says, this is to fulfill what was spoken of in the prophet, God with us. But now we've jumped ahead to the time, September 11th, 3 BC, when Jesus is born. And we've gone off on a side point about the virgin, which is very important and central to all of this. But now we're just talking about Jesus being here and how he came to be here. So I've got a question. Why her? Why her? Now, there is no doubt, and unfortunately, the Catholic Church, Catholicism, has done a huge disservice to Mary in basically deifying her and making her into something she wasn't. What she was an amazingly faithful, knowledgeable Hebrew girl. Mary is an amazing person, but she was also something else. I'm going to state this in an awkward way, but it's for emphasis. She was nothing. Mary was nothing. She was nobody. She was nobody. There were kings. There were palaces. Herod had an amazing one, and Herod had daughters. By the way we think, by the way the world thinks, Jesus should have been born there, but he wasn't. The virgin birth, the incarnation of Christ, took place in the womb of the Virgin Mary. Why her? What's the point? Is there a message there? And then we have to ask, why here? Why? It's always pictured as a stable and like a barn-like structure. It wasn't. That's not, and you go to the Bethlehem, you can go there and see the geography. It was a cave. That's where they would keep animals. He was born in a cave, but basically we'd say born in a barn. Why here? There were palaces. There were beautiful homes. It didn't have to be done this way. But don't you think that God planned it this way? Yes, he did. And so there is a message in that. And don't forget, we're talking about Immanuel. We're talking about the with us God. And my last why question. Oh, and I want to say both this picture and the next picture, they are taken from the Nativity story. You can rent it on YouTube, probably $3-4. Watch it. There are some things that for dramatization, some stuff about Herod, that he was paranoid about the coming of the Messiah. That's dramatization, but there's nothing that's out of line with the narrative. And there is not anything that you can go watch that does a better job of laying out what these two people, Joseph and Mary, went through with her, this wholesome, wonderful Hebrew girl. Don't you think she was looked up to in her community? That she was kind of a model citizen? And then she's viewed as kind of a sleaze, an impure woman who gets pregnant. Who was going to believe that? How was she supposed to explain it? And this movie does a great job of showing what these people, and Joseph as well, what they went through and what all prices they paid in order to play their part in God's service. And that's the way we need to look at it. But why her? Why here? And why was it announced to them? And I think that this guy, I went out and found this image. I had to doctor it to make it look better. This is from the movie. This is a shepherd. And that's probably as good of a representation as you can find of what those shepherds looked like. They lived outdoors 24/7, 365. They didn't have a life as you and I know it. They were just part of the scenery. Nobody paid any attention to them. If Mary was a nobody, these guys were way below that, way below that. But it was to them that God sent his angel and then the entire heavenly host to announce to them, for unto you, these guys, the nobodies, is born this day in the city of David a Savior, which is Christ the Lord. Why them? Why her? Why there? Why them? And I don't think it can be summed up any better in explaining what it means that God's with us. We're smelly, we're sticky, and we're annoying. And he came anyway. He came to live among us, just the common folk with the common struggles that you and I have. What are we going to eat? How are we going to pay the bills? How are we going to get along? Life is hard. Herod's a creep. His soldiers are nasty. The Romans are here. All of that. There's a message in that he's with us, not just here in some abstract sense. He came and he lived among us. And you cannot find, in all of Christendom, you cannot find a better explanation of this than in the hymn. It's Martin Luther's hymn. It's From Heaven Above to Earth I Come. It's 15 verses, and it does an amazing job of explaining everything you need to know about the birth of Jesus Christ, all in one hymn. But I want to just quote a few verses of it. If you want to find it in its entirety, you can go Google TLH, From Heaven Above to Earth I Come, and you'll find the lyrics, and you can even find the music to it. It is a wonderful hymn. I know in much of the world it's not well known, but listen to the message. This is Luther's answer to all the questions that I just asked. Ah, Lord, who hast created all, how weak art thou, how poor and small, that thou dost choose thine infant bed, where humble cattle lately fed. Were earth, all of earth, were earth 1,000 times as fair, beset with gold and jewels rare, it yet were far too poor to be a narrow cradle, Lord, for thee. For velvet soft and silken stuff, the things a king's child would have had, thou hast but hay and straw so rough, whereon thou, king so rich and great, as 'twere thy heaven, art throned in state. And this verse, I think, is something that we should all commit to memory, at least its message, to keep perspective on the Christmas season, because the Christmas season is hijacked and it's made about materialism and avarice and greed and money and buying and selling and all of that. And I'm not saying the celebrating is bad, but we need to remember this. And thus, dear Lord, it pleaseth thee to make this truth quite plain to me, that all the world's wealth, honor, might are naught and worthless in thy sight. So why Mary? Why in a cave with animals? Why to the shepherds? Jesus is telling us how we are to view the material things of this world and all that it has to offer. The message is unmistakable. In coming to be the with us God, he was really with us. And he showed that the things that this world values, he does not value. And if that doesn't shape and affect and influence and mold our thinking, then I don't know what will. So therefore the Lord will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Immanuel. He chose to be with us. And even more, and if you've watched my channel, you watch my teachings, you know this, he's with us in an ongoing way. In John 1:14, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory of the one and only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. He dwelt among us. When it says that he dwelt, it means he tabernacled. He came and he was here with us. And don't forget, I think this is probably the most powerful image of putting perspective on the nativity of Christ. We've got Mary holding her newborn son. You know what I like about this? It's one of the few places where they actually have a kid that looks like a newborn. Usually they've got Mary holding a 6-month-old baby. She's holding the newborn Christ, and in the frame next to it, it's the same Mary 33 years later holding the Christ who came to live and to die for all of us. He came to be Immanuel. And this is how God showed his love among us. He sent his one and only Son into the world that we might live through him. He continues to be God with us. John 14:20, and I'll put the link to this video in the description below because we just did it not long ago. At that day, this is Jesus in the upper room. At that day, you will know that I am in my Father, and you in me, and I in you. And the title of that video was Eden, Then and Now. God's dwelling with us is what Jesus was talking about there. He lives in us. Colossians 1:27, Christ in you, the hope of glory. And all of that is there as we think about this one term. Isn't it amazing how God can pack so much into one specially created word just for this purpose? Immanuel, the with us God. This is Messiah 76. Together, we are decoding the deception. God bless and have a great day.